Well, welcome. We are coming to you live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Thank you very much for tuning in. You are watching The Week Ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson. Well, let's get into your headlines, perhaps before we take a look at your top stories for the look on The Week Ahead. SABC General Secretary Zwinizi Mavabi says legendary actor Patrick Shai's contribution to the Labour Federation's programme to highlight issues of violence against women will not go unnoticed. The National Institute for Communicable Diseases has reported 3,049 new COVID-19 cases in the country in the latest reporting cycle. And Ekurhuleni Mayor Tanya Campbell has condemned the murder of the deputy principal of the Pomalong Secondary School in Tembisa, just east of Johannesburg. Also, look at your headlines. Let's get into your top story for the week ahead. It's widely expected, that the Reserve Bank will again raise the repo rate when it announces its monetary policy decision this coming Thursday. Now, experts believe the Monetary Policy Committee will raise the repo rate by 25 basis points as inflationary pressures continue to rise. And central banks in developed countries are hiking rates. It follows major cuts to cushion economies against the harsh effects of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Higher interest rates will mean indebted consumers will feel the pinch as their debt repayments increase. Inflation has been on an upward trajectory following persistent high oil prices that led to high fuel prices here at home. At the November sitting, the Monetary Policy Committee said it expected inflation to average 4.3% this year. But some economists believe this may be revised upwards. Administered prices like electricity, water and municipal rates, as well as global oil prices, remain key risks to inflation going forward. The Reserve Bank said its projection model showed possible hikes in the repo rate of 25 basis points in each quarter this year.
The primary reason being the elevated inflation rate. We saw inflation coming in at 5.9% in December, and the average for the year as a whole is 4.5%, although that is banging line with the midpoint of the Reserve Bank's target. The concern is about rising inflation. Inflation is expected to remain higher for quite some time. And of course, looking at global factors, the normalization of interest rates has started, and the major central banks have already indicated that they will hike, particularly the U.S. Federal Reserve. It is expected to hike as early as March this year.
There are some concerns, however, that the higher interest rates will have a slowing effect on economic growth as higher debt repayments takes away from the disposable household incomes. Although rates are expected to increase gradually over the medium term, experts say it will take some time before rates are at pre-pandemic levels. Others, however, say the Reserve Bank should take its time before continuing to raise rates.
South Africa does not have a consistent investment confidence. And in the next coming month, or in the month of January and in the month of February, South Africa will inconsistently go in the same trend as it did in December. So I don't believe that we can only use what happened in December to take a decision that will affect people in general, while we are sitting with really a situation of poverty in South Africa that is above 60%, and unemployment that is really unmanageable at the current point in time. So I will expect the Reserve Bank to hold the repo rate in spite of what might have happened, but we look at the trends for January and February, and then on the May sitting, and then we can see whether we review. If on May we review to a 25 basis point, it will be fine.
Stats SA will release the December data for producer inflation this week. It's expected that the producer price index, measuring price changes at factory gates, will come out at 9.9% compared to 9.6% in November. inflationary pressures will likely come from high fuel prices. Gloria Sefako Mosi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Right, for more on this and what we can expect in your economic news this coming week, we're joined by Dr. Azwi Fanele Nemashungwaza, economics lecturer at the University of Venda. Dr. Azwi, a very good afternoon to you and thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you to everyone and to Leslie for inviting me to this program.
Well, let's get straight into it then, Dr. Azwi. We're looking at the precarious economic situation that South Africa finds itself in and perhaps the meeting by the MPC on Thursday. So in light of the cost of living in South Africa as well going up, do you anticipate the repo rate to remain the same or increase? What views do you hold?
So I can say, seeing what is happening in South Africa, especially after the release of the Statistics South Africa data on Wednesday, one can easily say that the possibility is that the South African Bank is going to hike the repo rate. So they have mentioned, amongst others, the issue of high inflation rate. So seeing that inflation rate in December was sitting at 5.9, which is just a 0.1% below the upper target. So somebody can easily say that can be the main contributor to their reason for rising the repo rate today, when they make the announcement. Not to forget that South Africa is said to be in a country, or say it's a price taker country. So having this information that was announced by IMF that US is just about to embark on what we call a hawkish monetary policy, where they're deciding to increase the repo rate in their second quarter this year. So the possibility is that if South Africa does not follow suit, we're going to lose most of our investors. So because the only issue that can help us to keep our investors in South Africa is only to keep a higher rate that is above those who are price makers. So because we were said to have this international appeal of only to be able to attract foreign investors, if we have higher interest rate, that can attract them. So the possibility is that South Africa cannot just sit and say, we were looking maybe, for example, at the issue of a weak economic growth, but seeing that we are a country that's mostly affected by what is happening in those rich countries or developed economies. So the possibility is that we are going to hear the announcement of a hike in interest rate today.
So, Dr. Azwi, on the back of that then, I mean, if we look at what these, interest rates are going to look like, perhaps as we preview this before Thursday, I mean, South Africa's Reserve Bank's expected or anticipated rather to raise the interest rate to 4% on the 27th of January. I mean, how are South Africans going to cope with this? Can the average South African afford this interest hike? How is this going to affect the value chain at large?
So I can easily say that looking at this issue of hiking interest rate, we can say it becomes a punishment to the poor, but not only to the poor, but the South Africans as a whole, because South Africans are faced with many challenges. We are faced with high levels of these high fuel prices. So we can see that now in last year, so a record high level of price increase, which was above 20 rands. So something that is also affecting consumers. So we also have another serious problem that we as the whole country is facing, the issue of energy price. So because we know that for now, Eskom is also pushing for another increase in energy price. So seeing the ordinary consumers in general, we can say that another increase in repo rate is something that I believe the general South African can afford, especially for now, when many South Africans are not working. There's a high level of poverty in South Africa and high level of inequality.
You were looking at the World Bank, in fact, who's approved a loan for South Africa, the latest, in fact, including $750 million to boost economic growth. I mean, can South Africa afford to accept this loan? And if we look at the structure of the loan and the repercussions, particularly for future generations to come, what do you think this impact is also going to have on South Africa at large going forward?
So we can say that the idea of South Africa going for that, a loan of 750 billion. Don't forget that for now we're standing at at another loan. If we add this another loan which is coming to South Africa in a form of 11.4 billion, so adding up to make an amount of 290,000 billion, the loan that is now sitting at the Treasury of South Africa. And somebody, number one, will question as to if we are going for another loan for now, having all these loans from different international institutions. So somebody can say, was that a wise idea to go for another loan? Because if we check those financial institutions that have offered South Africa that large amount of money, so if we check the record, somebody cannot see any check to say from this money, we can say that we have made maybe a progress. So what's the point of going for another loan? So don't forget that when we continue to increase our debt, the national debt, so it is because the national debt, it's used as a measure for our borrowing from the international market. So if our national debt comes to a level like where we are now, we're just about 70% of GDP. So we are sending a negative message to the international world, especially investors, to say South Africa is not a good country to make investment with, because there is also a possibility that in the longer term, the South Africa may not be able to make repayment. Now we are sitting at a point where we find that South Africa has to pay an amount that's more than 1 trillion only to service the debt. So can you see that if we have a debt that we're only servicing by that large amount, so it simply means that South Africa is now diverting the way of maybe servicing or making or delivering a good service to the public or to the country, but just servicing the loan. So going for another loan, I don't think it would be a good idea, because this thing will haunt us in future. Some of those people who are going for this loan, they won't be there maybe to carry the burden. So it will be a burden that may continue for a long time, and the next generation will just have to face the penalty of people who won't be there maybe in 10 or 15 years later.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the weakened economy and, you've spoken about the repo rate impacting investor confidence, and also some of the factors that have contributed to a weaker economy, including how this is going to impact energy prices, food prices, fuel levies, etc. I wonder, when will we begin to stabilize and reach rates seen at a pre-pandemic level?
So, because we are talking of this, we call them all these prices that I'm talking about. We call them the volatile prices. So looking at the treasury that South Africa is going on. So looking at those different types of what we call the volatile prices, somebody can say we don't see any change in the near future, because now we are seeing Eskom still pushing for higher price of energy, and then we still see a higher prices as far as fuel is concerned. So somebody can say, even after this pandemic, so we can say that South Africa will still be battling with higher energy prices, higher interest rate, as well as this higher fuel price, which will mean that when we talk of a recovery in economic growth, it will just be a myth, something that we won't easily realize in the near future.
Well, farmers, speaking of which, have also been affected. When we look at perhaps how this repo rate increase could affect farmers, if we look at their precarious situation, already struggling to pay back loans made by the Land Bank, what issues arise here in terms of food security and further debts for them on that front? So
the issue of high interest rate, it will affect farmers in a negative way, knowing that there's no option, the farmers don't have any option except to go and make loans with these financial institutions. So with high interest rate, it simply means that they are now barred to go for higher loans or to get more funds from financial institutions. And we know that if those farmers cannot access enough funds, it simply means that they are not going to expand production. And we know that one of the drivers or one of the sectors that's driving the South African economy is agriculture. So when agriculture cannot survive or is not performing well, automatically it means that the food security will be affected. And we know that we are still talking of a country where we have a high number of people in South Africa who are going to bed without anything to eat. So automatically, when food security is affected, that will also affect or also increase the issue of poverty and also the issue of inequality in South Africa. So even though we talk of that issue of saying that we want to achieve those chief objective like the issue of equality and the issue of maybe eliminating poverty in South Africa, unless agriculture as the sector that is driving the economy can be helped in other ways. So meaning that unless there are funds or the government is ready to help farmers, because with the high interest rate, simply means that farmers are now discouraged or they cannot expand production.
Oh, Dr. Azwi, let's wrap up this conversation by taking a look at the broader global picture. I mean, we're looking at the global COVID-19 recovery plans that are put in place. And I wonder, on the back of, the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, also calling for a new deal, perhaps for the richer countries, the G7, to assist developing countries to help cushion the impact that COVID-19 has had on these countries at large. What sort of new deals should we be seen coming through from the international richer countries as we're speaking?
So I believe it's high time that this international community have to rethink about the issue of these developing economies, because we can see that even before pandemic, developing economies were struggling. So that pandemic has only come to exacerbate the situation. So unless there is intervention, a strong intervention by international economies, so I don't think those developing economies have a way to come out of this. There are serious challenges. So I'll also maybe making a call maybe to those who are policymakers, maybe to come up with something that is strong. For example, to say there should be a law or a rule to force those rich economies to reconsider their way they treat those developing economies. Because when we talk of an increase or a change in global economy, so we cannot talk about rich economies only. It's now high time that those people or those countries that think they are rich and they have that superpower rethink and reconsider their decision to say, if we say we are growing or maybe we are making it, what about if we can also think about these smaller economies? Because if we can say that we have an economy that is united, we must also be talking of an economy where all the countries are united, where those who are struggling, the richer ones come into place and then try to help them out of the situation.
Well, thank you very much for your time, your economics news for the coming week. Thank you very much to Dr. Azwi Fanele Nemishungwa, again, economics lecturer at the University of Venda, unpacking what to expect on the economic front for the coming week. Let's take a quick ad break. The week.
I think at the moment.
Welcome back. You're watching The Week Ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson. Let's continue with more news now. For a look at the week ahead on the international front, we are joined by SABC News international editor Sophie Mugwe. Now, very good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us here on The Week Ahead today.
Good afternoon, Liesl.
Let's hone in very quickly on the issue between the Ukraine and Russia. We've seen updates, coming through on the international front. But I wonder, in terms of South African government coming out and voicing their opinion, I mean, it seems that they've made the decision to keep a watch on the Ukraine rather than vocalize their stance to date. As we're speaking, has there been a response from our government?
Not yet. I think you know that South Africa is a member of the BRICS nations.
Yes.
You know that Russia is part of that group. And you know that Russia has a long-standing relationship with the ruling party in South Africa. And therefore, I think the international relations minister will have to really apply her mind very well in terms of what statement can South Africa perhaps put out there, particularly because you have a situation where you have to weigh between justice and injustice, but also look at the relations between South Africa, the European Union, including the United States of America. We know that NATO plus the U.S. have taken a decision that they are going to take a particular position against Russia on this matter, and Russia being seen as a country that is meddling in the affairs of Ukraine. And therefore, South Africa is trying to strike a balance. And it is for that reason, perhaps we can say the country has taken a decision to monitor or watch the development. If South Africa was to release a statement, it will be a statement that is calling for cool heads to prevail and calm and avoid conflict in all costs, in line with the foreign policy of South Africa, particularly on issues that are related to peace and security around the world.
Absolutely. And when we look at South Africa's influence, I mean, in the debate between NATO and Russia on the Ukraine, what sway could South Africa ultimately have? And when we look at the international community's response, what have they done to engage with Russia, perhaps to deter the Kremlin from military action and even aggression and avoid a humanitarian crisis?
Well, many countries have taken a similar position to South Africa, depending on which side they stand. You know that many countries would definitely support the United States of America and NATO, you know, being the powerhouse around the world, and the U.S. being the largest economy in the world. And therefore, when you take the United States of America head on, you must be clear in terms of what you are going to say, because that can come back and haunt you. And that is why it is very difficult for some countries to take a position on this matter. But also economically, you know that you have to apply your mind as a country, because you can find yourself in the wilderness, particularly on trade and investment. You are aware that America is pushing for more sanctions to be imposed on Russia, and NATO is doing the same, and the European Union, some countries are doing the same. And therefore, when you take a position as a country, you have to take that into consideration, that you are not caught in a crossfire. And therefore, many countries have decided to take a position of wait and see. But we know that countries such as South Africa, the policy of South Africa, international relations, it's clear that South Africa supports peace and security, and there's no way South Africa can condone a conflict, or the conflict that is building up, or to fuel the conflict. And South Africa in particular will take a position of calling all the stakeholders to really engage in talks and avoid conflict.
We also, whilst these tensions are raging on, I mean, we also can't ignore the precarious global COVID-19 economic situation, perhaps also shining a spotlight on what the recovery of that is going to look like going forward. And obviously in the week, we heard about a $750 million loan approval from the World Bank to boost economic growth for South Africa. When we look at the terms of conditions and the challenges that also rise from this, given the other loan of 11.4 billion as we've already taken out on, how is this going to impact the country going forward? And what are the challenges that arise from this?
You know that the IMF and the World Bank and some other financial institutions have put aside money to borrow to, or lending agreements and grants to countries that have been affected by COVID-19. I think what is critical for South Africa, as we spoke to the professor earlier on, it is to ensure that we don't find ourselves squeezed by these loans. Because at the end of the day, this is not a grant. It is a loan, and it is a lot of money. And repayment agreement must be clear. South Africa is likely to find itself in a very, very difficult situation years to come, when they have to pay all this loan. We don't even know what's likely to happen in the future. And therefore, I think South Africa must tap into its own knowledge and skills and capacity to think hard in terms of what can we do to recover from this challenge. Because if we don't recover economically, this is a recipe for conflict and recipe for insecurity, instability, and political instability. And therefore, leaders of this country must really come together and come up with a pact or a deal. You know that the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, 2 years ago when he was delivering Nelson Mandela lecture, he spoke about a global New Deal. We need something like that in South Africa. But of course, it will expand the continent and the world. Unless leaders around the world come together to pave a way forward in terms of this New Deal, no country will survive the challenges of economic inactivity. And therefore, yes, a country can be inward looking, but at the end of the day, no country is an island. And therefore, it will be better to listen to the Secretary General of the United Nations when he is saying we need a global pact or a New Deal. Therefore, we hope that it will start at local level where leaders come together and think about the level of poverty and unemployment. If you don't address that, no political party or leader will survive the wrath of the nation.
Oh, let's leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us here today on The Week Ahead. And again, SABC News International Editor Sophie Mogwena giving us the latest on what to look out for the week ahead on the international front. And that's where we're going to leave it for you today. From myself, Liesl Wilson, and the rest of the Week Ahead team. Until next time, do take care. It's goodbye for now.
Looking at the State Capture Commission.